Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another live session at the Reactor. My name is Rav. I'm program manager here at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful, please be kind, ask a lot of good questions. The chat is open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. We're back with episode 2 of DevOps and AI series, and this session will be led by Corey. And with that, I'm now going to bring Corey up on the stage. Hi, Corey, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Rob, for this lovely session. I have named it Monitoring, Logging, and AI Model Performance. So that's quite a mouthful of content. I want to know for the people in the audience, just generally where everyone is skill set wise. So if you're a beginner, I'm not sure if I can see the chat. Hopefully I can see the chat. Someone write something in the chat so I can see it. Yeah, okay, I see Microsoft Reactor. Hello, everyone, welcome. So I can see the chat. Perfect. Let me know. Yeah, this is going to be a session for all skill levels, but I'd love to know where you're coming from. If you feel like you're a beginner with, working with generative AI or an expert, just let me know skill levels wise and where you're joining from. I'm always curious to know where people are joining from. It's like Rob had mentioned, a global audience here. So cool. We will get into it, and I'm going to say this first. We're going to start off with a bit of I would say commercials. So, kind of like when you listen to a podcast or something and they have like the ad breaks or like the ads at the beginning. This is what's going to happen because I want to share some great content that we also have going on. But cool. So Kimberly, nice. So beginner intermediate from Minnesota. Awesome. Nick's from Toronto. Eyal, I probably butchered your name. I'm sorry. Beginner from Israel. Welcome everyone. So it got some mix in terms of skill levels. Like to see that. Like I said, so this is going to be a blended kind of session in terms of the content, but I think it's important, especially when we're talking about building generative AI applications, which we're going to be kind of primarily focused on. Once we actually have an idea and we put that into place and we have some application, we pick a model, which is also a lot of different things. How do we, after we get it out there to like actual users, what do we do next? And that's what this session is going to be about. Cool. Hey, welcome, Chris, beginner from Jacksonville. So, like I said, I want to see if there's any beginners in the audience because I'm doing a little small ads for before we get into the actual content that you come here for. First and foremost, I'm the content lead for a course, an open source course, 18 lessons actually on GitHub, which we call Generative AI for Beginners. Let me know if you've taken the course or you've at least heard about the course in the chat. I hope somebody has. That would be really bad for my marketing, my own personal marketing if no one's heard about it in the chat. But hopefully you have. If you haven't, do check out in the link. We put this together. We actually just released, and why I'm talking about it is because we just released a full 18 lesson video series with it. So if you like video, which I assume you do since you're here watching a stream, you like learning that way, it's actually completely 18 lessons on that, and also text as well. So do check that out. Thank you, Alejandro, for sharing. Oh, and we have a LinkedIn user. It does. So this is like the first time we're streaming on LinkedIn, apparently, and I see someone's from Washington. It doesn't say here on the chat. This is LinkedIn users. So yeah, thank you, Rob. Thank you, LinkedIn user from Washington. Maybe you're someone working at headquarters. Cool. And then we also last ad, I promise. We have this AI Discord. Let me know if you have Discord. I hope everyone does have Discord. Discord is really cool, really great place to connect. It's nice. I'm chatting with you here, and I'm looking at the chat and we're talking. But Discord's really cool because we can do one-on-one chats, or we can do one-to-many chat. So we have one set up for AI specifically, and like all of these sort of different AI products and services that we have and tools out there, because there's tons of tools and technologies. So it's really a community of learners, which seems like a lot of people are doing, learning things out here. So do check that out as well. A lot of people from the courses come from the Discord. So it's a great way to meet other people building with generative AI. Oh, great. So now I see some LinkedIn names. Okay, Jose and Camarillo. So yeah, LinkedIn is where it's at. I told Rob I didn't dress for LinkedIn. I didn't know we were streaming from LinkedIn. It's more of a professional network over there, not the YouTube audience. So no, not to say that you're not professional on YouTube, but LinkedIn is for professionals. Cool. So where we are actually at in terms of large language models and what we were talking about here, focusing at least mainly on, is the actual life cycle. And I put here the real world because a lot of times, we have examples, especially when we're learning to work with generative AI applications or building them, of like, here's a Jupyter notebook, and look, it's making a call to a model and it's getting a response back, and look, in the perfect happy path, no users, just me. Here's how it's working. Large language models, and that's great, but that's not actually what the reality is once we start deploying applications and having real users. So I think this is kind of giving you a general idea of all of the different steps to get to rolling out, deploying, and having users work on it. So the first one is the kind of the prototyping phase, which is like, a lot of times I think people get sort of stuck on that phase, which is okay, because it's an important one. But it's really kind of exploring, evaluating, experimenting, doing what we call prompt engineering. So designing prompts in a way so that it's effective to whatever use case or the application that you're building. Also, a big part of this is like finding large language models. There's a new large language model, I used to say, like every week. It seems to be studied, like if there's not a large language model released every week, it's because they're going to get one, like 3 in 1 week basically. So it's constantly release of those large language models, and you're finding the right one, finding one that works with your use case from both a technology perspective and cost perspective, which we'll talk about when we talk about operationalizing these things, is important. So that's the first step, prototyping, and that's getting really important to making sure that you have a good use case, and things are sort of working, and it's going to work with generative AI. And then comes into what we generally, from a traditional machine learning side thing, called training. But in this case, we don't really, when we're working with large language models, necessarily have to do training. There's the option to do fine tuning, which is basically presenting a lots of data. If we want to have a very specific use case that the large language model maybe doesn't perform well on. But we obviously want to also do like an evaluation and comparison. So like I said, there's multiple large language models out there, specifically also within AI Studio, which we'll talk about from a product perspective. Like, okay, which one do I choose? That's like a lot of like questions I get all of the time, and really, there's no easy answer to say do this, use this one, right? There's some specialized models that do perform well in certain tasks, but a lot of times it's iteration, it's evaluating, it's comparing them, and then also having the option, which has been a growing kind of space, is also being able to validate these locally. So in some cases, especially some of the open source models, you can run those locally. Let me know in the chat if you've ever run a large language model locally, which is like Llama, Olama, or yeah, all those different other tools out there. So if you ever run a large language model locally, let's know. Let me know what tool you use, because I'm always interested. Because there seems to be, that's a really cool space, especially if you have the hardware to do that. Like I'm running on a basic MacBook, well, not basic MacBook, but MacBook Pro, and I can run a lot of models locally. So that's another option when you're talking about pushing or iterating on this life cycle. The next step is like kind of augmenting this, and that's really when we're talking about RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. I know there's some beginners in the audience, so maybe that's a new term. But that's really, again, being able to take data and add some sort of context to the prompt, whether that's a data in a database or even a document, and then allowing the large language model to sort of process that as well, and giving a very relevant answer to the user. It's probably the simplest way I can kind of explain it. We can do things like personalization, also giving a lot more context. So let's say you're asking questions about recent events and news, and obviously these large language models, they take in lots of data, but that's at a certain point in time, and they need to then also so maybe you want to have more recent data to feed the model in terms of in the prompt. So RAG allows you to do that. Also, prompt tuning. So again, being able to tune and change our prompts in a way that's the most effective. is a huge part in terms of really nailing down the use case and getting to the bigger step, which we're talking about today. And then lastly, just developing workflows, right? In terms of also just maintenance and performance. Where does that kind of sit within your workplace there? I see Chris. Oh, okay, Olama LM Studio, perfect. That's a good stack. Yeah, so I've definitely used a lot of Olama. This Llama, was it Llama.cpp? That's kind of like, it's like Olama is built on top of that, but that's another option. So if you haven't run anything locally, Chris and I, we we highly recommend. I'm going to say this: Corey and Chris sponsored Olama in terms of being able to run these locally. It's really cool to do. And last but not least, right, really what we're talking about, we're going to focus on now is the operationalizing. It's a tough word to say a lot of times. Operationalizing these models. So really putting this into production and having users outside of just yourself and your friends, use your application. And I think it's interesting now because when we looked at like monitoring, and I like that a lot of people are coming here as beginners. I think traditionally in software and web applications specifically, monitoring was such an enterprisey thing to do. It was such a focus on, once you get 500 users, 1,000 users, then you want to monitor it, because then you want to make sure, like, if your services are down or services are slow or deprecation, or like being deprecated some type of way, you want to make sure from the user perspective you're delivering that stuff. But I think, when we're talking about generative AI, and this is kind of my own personal thoughts, really, generative AI, monitoring, I think, should be kind of installed in any type of application, of not just barring if you're an enterprise company or the amount of users that you have, because there's one thing if your website's down or the software's not working as planned, but if a large language model is generally producing unwanted responses, no matter if you have one user or 1,000 users or a million users, that's going to be really effective or really detrimental to your goals as a product or a business. So I think really monitoring, even at the beginning stages of building, and once you start having an application in generative AI that's powered by a large language model, is really important to install. So I'm happy to see everyone from different skill levels, not just I'm an expert, I'm just kind of interested here. But we're going to look at monitoring specifically. We're going to also once I built this deck, I realized I kind of used the word monitoring and evaluation almost interchangeably, and that's also because I think when we're talking about evaluating and monitoring, there's a lot of similar workflows and similar tools to use, but also since you can basically not necessarily hot swap models, but essentially, like, if you're getting this through an API and you want to switch to another large language model, you're both monitoring and maybe evaluating the performance. So it's kind of a bit of a mix, I think. So why monitoring at all? You come here, so I think I convinced everyone. But for the YouTube audience that watches this later on because it's recommended by the algorithm, and you've come and you're like, okay, what is this guy talking about monitoring? There's a couple of reasons. So one, I think, is really important, is the security side of things. So this is the OWASP, and I think they probably updated this because I pulled this like a long time ago, but this is like the top 10 security threats for large language model applications. The first one is prompt injection, and that's just basically how users can use the powers of prompting, if you will, to cause detrimental things into your application, or the application to perform in ways that you don't want them to be. So basically tricking the model to either expose some sensitive information, so that's actually at the bottom there as well, or making any sort of again, really what you're going against sort of the goals of the application, whether it's a customer service application, or interacting with a user in a certain type of way. And then also insecure output handling, right? So what is the model actually presenting? There was a story I remember seeing, and this is like kind of a classic thing when we talk about security, because there's always some stories around these things, like, oh, I heard about this company doing it wrong or whatever. But this is obviously a threat to all large language model applications, and no matter if you think that you've got this down, right, it's always good to kind of refresh your memory. It's not just because the people who are a novice and they just didn't care about security. It's just that there's so many different threats out there. But like, yeah, secure output handling, right? Especially when we're talking about RAG and it's pulling information, let's say from a company database, and presenting it to a user. So you're pulling information and entering the prompt. There could be times where there could be sensitive information or that's in those documents, and you don't want those actually to be presented to the chat or the user. So those are some things when we talk about monitoring that I think are important. Also, plugin design. A lot of people, let me know in the chat if you use like LangChain or I always say LangChain, LangChain. I don't know why. LangChain and Semantic Kernel, for example. These tools, they also have plugins and additional features that and they can consistently get updated because they want to make sure that they are using the right amount of security and things like that. And there's tons of other tools out there that would say, oh great, this is a new large language model tool, and we'll clone the repo and then put it in our application. You don't really know necessarily what's the ins and outs of that. So making sure that the plugins are designed in a good way that's secure, and especially if you're connecting that into other databases or data sources, that again that data is also being secured. And again, that's also from a monitoring perspective something to look at. But by far, I should have went back. Hold on. Okay, can someone guess number one thing to care about when we're talking about monitoring? I'm gonna wait. Hopefully, hey Brill, hey, how are you? I already showed the answers. Someone can definitely write the answer down real quick. The number one thing, the priority number one, when we're talking about monitoring our large language model applications, and I expect maybe someone from the LinkedIn audience. Maria, I see. Hello, welcome, Maria. Someone from the LinkedIn audience perhaps can give me this answer. There's always the delay in the chat, so I'm just waiting. Metrics, good guess, Kimberly. Metrics is important, right? But what does the metrics affect? I already exposed the answer a little bit, but the metrics lead us to something else. Like it's resources. Okay, Alejandro, I like where you guys are going. These are all great answers, but not the right answer. All right. Users, right? That's my answer. So I think users is like performance is also that's something we'll talk about. But when we talk about monitoring, I think users is like priority number one. And by users, I definitely just mean user experience here. And metrics, performance obviously ties into that, like the user experience. If they're not getting your responses back, the performance is bad. But I think if we talk about the effect of, especially when we're talking about large language model applications, the effect of having a bad user experience is almost even like almost outsized or outgrown in terms of other applications. So if the user is interacting with the large language model, they know that in the chat, and they have a bad interaction or a bad experience, it seems like maybe it's because the attention and focus on generative AI at the moment, likelihood of them making that a public thing or reporting it to you is much higher, I think, than like they got a poorly written email or something. So I think when we're looking at that, it's always, I think, from a monitoring perspective, I feel users should be number one. And how are users experiencing this application through working with the large language model? So I've talked a lot about generative AI, and that's going to be really our focus here. But there's obviously, when we talk about AI in general, and I'm going to label this as traditional machine learning, there's things that we've been monitoring for a long time, or at least since we've been putting machine learning models into production or into applications. And I want to kind of show the differences between those two areas. So the first one, in machine learning, we have this idea of like data drift. And essentially what that means is, data is constantly changing. Maybe we've trained a model based on certain data in a certain time period. And the reality of that world is not the same anymore. So we're kind of using either stale data, or even the predictions, for example, aren't attuned to or aligned with this sort of prediction drift as well. And we have tools even within Azure and as well as within other tools that are out there, open source tools that you may have also used if you come from a ML background, to also predict that. So we can to monitor through these things, whether it's the type of predictions that are going, how different they have been over a certain time period, and making sure that the predictions aren't have drifted or gone away from the intentional goal of our application. And then obviously data quality is a huge point, especially when we're talking about training models, right? So how attuned it is, and how much quality it is in terms of being close to our use case, the amount of data that we've collected, and we can also monitor that, especially if we're doing redeployment of models. So hey, after a certain time period, we're going to retrain the model and deploy again. Is the data that we've gotten also quality compared to what we initially trained? So that's like traditional machine learning. But in the large language model side of things, there's still some of that as well. Less so on the data side, because unless you're training your own large language models, which not many people are, but data quality might, or unless you're exposed to all the data quality is in effect, but maybe not something you can control at all times. Maybe especially when we talk about fine tuning, that's certainly a case. But also, we call data tracing now, which is really mainly about how in the large language model, when we are getting a response, how does that actually trace, or how does that go through our application? And we can see in terms of performance, which was I think Kimberly had mentioned, right? Even uptime, I see Jeff has mentioned, right, as well, in terms of if we're hitting other services. So we want to do some tracing of that data and seeing where the large language models making decisions, and where applications sort of making decisions as well. The other one is generation quality, which I think was also another answer that I saw as well, in terms of making sure the large language model is like giving great quality responses. And we actually do that through evaluating. And I'll talk about different ways to evaluate. And then lastly, I think when we talk about cost, which maybe somebody said, if someone didn't say cost earlier, maybe they did say cost. If they didn't, someone can type cost there. But token usage is another big one, right? In terms of like, uh, these a lot of these applications, or these models rather, aren't they aren't free to run in terms of, and the costs are normally around the amount of tokens that you're using. There's obviously different models and pricing. So making sure you keep that and monitoring your token usage is obviously going to be important, unless you have completely unlimited funds, which good luck if you have. But I think one thing that is obviously shared here is, and I think that was some of the earlier points, is it being operational, right? So like both of them, no matter what, the model has to, wherever you're serving the model or hosting the model, has to work. So being able to monitor operational things is obviously important as well. And let me know if you have any questions. Love all the chat as well. I typically answer questions as they come in, or not immediately, but so don't like hold it in and say I'll wait till he asks me, because I will answer at all times. So in terms of data tracing, I said that was kind of a newer concept maybe. So I'm trying to keep this kind of generally agnostic in terms of concepts, but when we talk about tools, specifically from an Azure perspective or Microsoft perspective, Promptflow is probably the best tool to use in terms of tracing. And then this is just a quick screenshot to just kind of show you what I mean here. So if you just see number one, we basically have these inputs. An input is basically what the user is writing in, or the chat box or the search box or what have you. And then we actually can kind of see in each step here what first the model is going to do. And in this case, a large language model extracts the query. So it actually like sort of improves the question, or gets the data or the important parts of the question out of what the question is asked. And then it goes and it uses a Python sort of function to get a Wikipedia URL. It gets the search back from that URL, and then processes it, and then gives it to the chat, or the large language model takes that answer from Wikipedia and then presents that to the user in a way that's in a natural language way, instead of just like copy paste. But if you've ever built any type of application, you see all these steps, things can go wrong. Users can type things that make errors. So in a way, with Promptflow, we can see all those things. We can run and test, do test runs of that. And then when we put it in production, also see where things are falling apart. and also see things like latency and things like that, and performance around that. So that's a little bit about data tracing. So once we talk about monitoring, or even what to monitor or what to evaluate, it comes to a couple of things, and I think Kimberly had mentioned this in terms of metrics. Uh, uh, these are kind of like, I think, five very key metrics to look at when we talk about working with large language models. Um, I think this is kind of a tied to Azure AI Studio and what we're measuring, but also you'll probably see this in the wild from any other type of applications that or monitoring applications, because it's generally understood on what are the key factors on, again, driving great user experience for your application. So the first one is groundedness, and this is really about if we can give the model some source material, and this I put here the use case being RAG, but it could be anything really. But if we have some source material, is it actually accurate to the response that the model is getting? So if we have something about we have like a demo about healthcare plans, right? So someone can come in and chat about their healthcare plan, and we have all of these PDFs that are of the company's healthcare plan. So is the model actually giving accurate information based on that, or is it hallucinating or fabricating and other information, right? And then we have metrics to determine that, which is one, scale from 1 to 5. If it's ungrounded, so like nothing is verifiable, what the model is saying in terms of what that information is. And then perfect 5 is actually they're using some verifiable inputs or any internal data that the model has. So that's groundedness. So keeping the model grounded, or you're having that metric is important, especially when we have the source materials. And one of the things important about these metrics is they don't apply to everything. So especially if you don't have source material, you shouldn't necessarily monitor or measure for groundedness. The next one is relevance. So is the model actually providing answers that are sort of relevant to the questions asked? Like nobody likes to ask a question to someone, right? And then don't get an answer or get like a completely different answer back. It happens in human communication all of the time. You ask a question to someone and they give you another answer that's not the question. But in large language model applications or generative AI applications, we generally want the large language model to be, giving relevant questions to, relevant answers, sorry, to the questions that are being asked. Obviously, big use case for this is chat-based applications. So if the users are interacting with the large language models, particularly in a chat type of environment, you want to make sure that whenever the user is asking questions, that they're relevant. And the metric for this is right. Irrelevant models is completely off topic, not presenting anything. Or 5, perfect. The model is really giving some really appropriate outputs or appropriate answers based on the question. So right is obviously taking the question in mind, not just the answer, and then how making that the relevancy score there. And again, these are all scores that I'll show you kind of how they get measured. The third one actually is coherence. So this is actually, does the model actually provide responses that read pretty like naturally? Really what the main use case or the excitement about large language models is their abilities to present responses in a very natural language type of format, right? So it's not just a chatbot that says uh, you know pick doing rules based and saying, oh, okay, you want help with this, call this number, right? It's oh, I hear you. It's a very natural language, very um, coherent way, right? In terms of how we would interact with if we were working with other individuals. So it's giving us that type of feeling. And I think coherence is really important when we're talking about applications that have that high touch of user interaction. And on a metric perspective, we're also measuring, right, if it's incoherent. So the quality is just not understandable. The sentence is pretty poor. And then 5 is perfect when it's just reading really seamlessly and that stuff. But let me know. I'm going to take a drink of water. So this is your chance to ask a question, particularly from the LinkedIn audience. I'm really want a professional question from the LinkedIn audience. So the other one is fluency, and like language, right? When you say you're fluent at a language, it's not that you just have a high vocabulary. That's just reading the really great at vocabulary, or it's not just that you understand all the grammar rules. It's like putting all of those things together and delivering a message. And in the same way, fluency is measuring that same thing. Does the model actually provide a proper language rules in terms of structure, grammar, vocabulary, and like using appropriate vocabulary? And I think this is really important when we talk about doing a lot of like varied or specialized user interaction. So let's say we had a large language model application or generative AI application that was particularly using in like the healthcare space, and really, but like really scientific, technical type of environment, and the users are asking things, and maybe we're pulling RAG, and we're also like supplementing the prompts with all this information. We'd probably want to see that the model is also kind of matching that level of vocabulary and structure, right? And not just being a super happy, helpful assistant, unless we, prompt it to do that or give it an assistant message, but that there is actually some, fluency in towards like actually the hard rules of grammar, but also the vocabulary there. The metric this time is actually what they call halting. And that's just when the model is actually just really sort of struggling with grammar or doing some awkward phrasing that doesn't make sense. And, in most interaction, maybe you've never seen this, but I've seen examples, right, where the model, especially in longer context, like as the chat goes on, maybe you'll see things that, maybe awkward phrasing or like at least getting to that level. And like always, number five is perfect. So just using the right vocabulary, following the grammar rules, and getting really the message across. And the last one is similarity. And when I first learned these things, were like kind of confused on like what's the difference between similarity and groundedness. And groundedness is all about accuracy. So it's like, is the model actually accurately saying things? Is it true in terms of what's being said, and then or valid or has an ability to be valid? And similarity is about just how similar is the model's ground response to the ground truth, or like a document that we presented. So even if we give like say examples of few shot examples in terms of when we do prompt engineering, is that response that the model is giving very similar to those examples that we've given it in terms of structure or vocabulary, things like that? So that's similarity. It's kind of its cousin, its groundedness, if you would say, but quite different in terms of how we measure it. And the use case for this is text generation. And the metrics, again, is like, is there a mismatch between what we have dedicated as a ground to truth, or is it perfect? So is it really contextually similar to the responses that we've given the ground truth? Cool. Welcome, Corey. I see another Corey. It's always great to see another Corey in the stream. That's great. Uh, beginner and somewhat intermediate, California. Welcome, Corey. And then when we obviously talk about like metrics to measure or monitor on for operational things, it's kind of like, I would say, the nuts and bolts, if that makes sense, or like really kind of the hard science of working with any sort of system before, but also specifically to large language models. So latency is important, right? Are we getting the responses back from wherever we're hosting the model in a good time, or even working with other parts of the application? Are we also getting responses quickly, and how fast are we getting those responses? Tokens used, like I said, that's going to really drive the cost there, as well as obviously requests per minute. So seeing how much traction or traffic that you have within your application is very important to monitor, especially when we're also talking about a cost perspective. And then error rate in terms of actually getting, if we get errors within our application, so like tracing or getting errors from making the request to the model. I see Chris has a question. So if grammar is a factor, could there be a disadvantage to getting at knowledge or logic that was trained in a different language from the query? I think I get what you're saying. So it's like the grammar. So we'll talk about how we're measuring this, or like how you can monitor that. And the grammar, let's say, just to kind of answer the question, like a will be applied to whatever that language that you're kind of judging on. So we can do human evaluation, and we'll talk about large language model evaluation as well. And for instance, like if I had a large language model evaluate my responses, it would know to sort of evaluate on that data. So I mean, on that response. So obviously, if you're these large language models more mostly, I think, multilingual in most cases, so they can operate on most languages. Obviously, if it's a language that we know it's probably not performing well on, yeah, that might have an effect on the um, grammar or the scoring on there. But generally, I think when we're talking about evaluate or monitoring and evaluating, you should be able to get a good score no matter what the language is. But that's a great question and something to further explore for sure. Uh, Great. Yeah. So, like I said, how to evaluate. So that's kind of like the last piece, right? So I say first is kind of like a log based evaluation or log based monitoring, which is just really kind of the operational concern. So these are all screenshots from the AI Studio, and that's kind of, I think, one of the main uh, points or reasons that we want to use something like AI Studio is because it's got that sort of end-to-end experience from choosing models to prompt flow to now the monitoring part. So you can actually see the token usage by day, the amount of requests, the total token count that you've gotten, the prompts, and then also completions as well. So there's a distinction there. And that's kind of super important, especially when we're talking about this operationally, if it's working, as well as from a cost perspective, right? So you can see at certain days you get these spikes, and you kind of know your kind of a user activity from that perspective. Kimberly has a question: Are reading comprehension levels of prompt taken into account when generating a response? Example: a kid versus adult asking what is data science. That's a good question. So I'd say it definitely takes into account if you're adding that into your prompt. So if you're saying to the large language model like as a system message, like you are a helpful assistant working with kids on exploring machine learning concepts, um, that could then in fact also, once the evaluation or the monitoring comes into place, that could also be in effect. And I would also say, if you're giving examples of what you like in terms of style, that would also come into account. So if you had this in your system message, or the way you're kind of giving rules to the large language model, examples of like a good style when you're speaking to a kid or speaking to an adult, that would also be, because that's the kind of the ground truth. So you can play around with these metrics a bit to get what you want. So you're making sure that you're hitting your audience and hitting your use case. But I love the question, because that means you're keeping an eye to users when we're talking about monitoring, which is perfect. If anything, I can go to sleep at night because someone asked a question about users. So that's good. Yeah, this is also operational concern, right? In terms of tracing. So we can look at each of these responses, questions, and answers, and trace actually within AI Studio on what actually happened to get us to that answer. Because it's not just in complicated applications. It's not just send an API request to large language model, get API request back, show it to user. When you're starting out, yeah, that's how some applications work. But in some cases, there's a lot of other things going on, and we can actually see. So in this case, right, we have this template chat flow, which I think I mentioned, and where the first trace is like modifying the um, query. So we're making the question better, and we can see in milliseconds how long that took. We can see then obviously when we get to the large language model to use that. So that's the OpenAI request to chat completion. That took a few milliseconds. And then looking up, so that function, and then generating the prompt context, so giving that to that, and then answering it, right? And then using the OpenAI resource. These are all traces, and we can all see, where we're actually getting either delays, errors, things like that. And that's super important to get important monitoring, because it's not, even when you're doing a large language model application, it's not always the large language model that you need to monitor or causes any issues that you need to investigate. It could be other parts of the application for sure. That is my kid at the door, just in case you want to know that if you were frightened on the stream. Cool. So I see. So Chat JPT, I like the name Chat JPT. I wish I had initials like that. Thoughts about the new Azure AI Gateway using API management monitoring features and the token metrics made available, and how to get this data into the fabric. Um, I don't know what I mean. I think it's great. We're going to talk about some of the cost perspective as well. So, I think within API management and things like that, I think it's uh, you know uh, makes sense in terms of how giving better people visibility. And then JPT has responded. And can you capture some of the good responses and bad responses as a data source that can be fed back into the prompt in a few shot prompting approach? So this is like kind of seeing basically what you could do, and that's a great point. Is like if I wanted to, I can see all the questions and answers, and then I could try to improve my prompts, and that's again why I kind of said like evaluating and monitoring is almost very circular here, because then I could see that, oh hey, in this case it's 5-5, but let's say one of these questions the fluency is down, and I can see that type of question continuing to perform fluently, with fluency being a very low score. I could then find out where I can maybe improve my prompt, or um, you know even improve some sort of giving it a few shots, or if we're doing talking about RAG, maybe there's some ways to improve indexing as well. So yeah, that's a great shot in terms of like what do you do with this information after after you have it, right? It's all about kind of improving the user experience, which again, that's number one priority. And yeah, then operational, like we can see requests per minute, we can see error rate, we can see latency as well within AI Studio. So in terms of actually to the point, right? Also being able to evaluate, you can do this through kind of manual prompting. So I think if you've worked with some generative AI applications, you might get this like question, like "Was this helpful?" or "Can you send feedback?" I think that's a really good way to capture any sort of feedback outside of the, as a developer or application owner. You can obviously get people to provide you feedback and collect that in some type of way, and that's another great way to get more of that higher touch, or more closer to the user type feedback, than rather than your own personal judgments, or metric based. And then also manually monitoring. So like I said, to the point of GPT's question as well, you can see within AI Studio specifically, but also to other tools out there, you can capture all the data traces and the responses, and then see, randomly, okay, let's look at the filtering out on the relevancy score, for example, and seeing how well that's performing. So that's kind of the human monitoring part of that. But the big one at scale is large language model evaluation. So it's actually using a large language model to evaluate the responses. Within AI Studio, you can actually set this up. So you choose the model that you want. Typically, what happens is, we would recommend is that you probably use the largest model or the most advanced model. So let's say you're using ChatGPT 3.5, for example, to or yeah. So yeah, 3.5, for example, to use GPT 3.5 to use the chat experience, and then you use GPT-4 or GPT-4o to do the evaluating and the monitoring, because then actually it's going to present these sort of scores again in terms of coherence, relevancy, groundedness, things like that. So to give you an example, right? So we have this question like, in what country is Normandy located? And we have an input answer here. Normandy is located in France, and then sort of the context of that, but it's not necessarily pointing to the groundedness of that. So you can see that there's different. It's like actually taking the same question, and there's different responses or inputs in terms of answers. So it's an interesting way, and I think that's how the best way to sort of monitor these applications at scale is to use a large language model. But obviously that comes with a cost, because you're using a large language model to to evaluate another large language model. So within all the tools out there, specifically here when we talk about AI Studio, we can do things like adjust the sample rate. So instead of doing all of every single one of the responses from users, we can take a percentage. So we can take 10% or 5% or whatever one makes the most sense from a cost perspective, and also then have that do the evaluation rather than doing 100% of all the requests that they're being sent in. So something to think about, especially when we're talking about monitoring cost. When you're doing the evaluation and monitoring, especially large language models, there's costs associated with that, and being able to adjust the sampling is a good way to, mitigate those costs. Another thing, right? Like I said, right, you have all this data now, and when things go bad, like, what do you do with it? So another cool feature is including a threshold. So whenever there's our responses that are, let's say, fluency 1 or 2, we can add these thresholds and even put in an email address to get notifications. So whenever your AI application has gone, off the happy path in terms of fluency, for example, you can get notifications and really investigate that pretty quickly. And again, keeping users in mind when that happens, then you can either alert users. Maybe you want to pause the application for a bit, things like that, or really investigate why that's occurring. It could be because maybe you're having someone trying to do like a prompt injection, for example. Really important to look at. And just to kind of finish off here, this is kind of what it looks like when we're giving the model a prompt to actually evaluate other large language model responses. So this is like kind of the system prompt. So it's basically saying we're giving a context, so whatever source document or whatever, and then the context of the chat, whatever the user's getting, and then the answer of the whatever the large language model that the user's interacting with has responded with. And we're also giving it like the metrics in terms of score. So here's the 5 if it's logical, here's the 1 if it's logically false, and then we choose between 1 and 5. So it's actually using the power of prompting and power of large language models to improve large language models and our user experience with them. I think there was another question about cost before, but again, that's another thing that happens, I think, when people are supposed to get starting out. We choose the biggest model out there. We hope we get a lot of users, and then we come back and we, maybe get the invoice, and maybe there's some shock in terms of how much things kind of cost. So within Azure, we have a cost estimator, so you can actually put in the amount of tokens that you sort of predict you're using, and seeing the monthly cost of those services. As well as any sort of cost alerts, things like that, similar to the monitoring alerts, where we see the large language model performing. Also, from a cost perspective, you can get alerts when you're hitting a certain threshold that you've designated. So that's generally it. So we cover monitoring again from large language models. Like I said, if there's one thing that you can take away, hopefully, from this is users are number one priority, but we have all these tools in place and techniques to make sure that we're hitting what everyone else said, right? The cost of the resources that we're using, the performance, right? Or delivering actually performant application. And then, third, right? Being able to see the different metrics that are out there. And if we're actually hitting the use cases, whether it's an audience perspective or a response perspective, that we have designed our applications for. So I wish everyone good luck in their building journey of working with generative AI. Like I said, I have these 2 resources that I'm sharing with you: the generative AI for beginners, new, fresh 18 lesson video, and the Discord. I hope at least to see 3 of you in the Discord right after this. That would be great. See it, and you can ping me. It's Corey Space in the Discord. I would love that. But perfect. If there's not any more questions, I always say this at the end of every stream, but you could have been anywhere on the internet, but you spent almost an hour with me talking about monitoring large language models. So for that, I'm truly appreciative. And see you guys in the next one.